Hey guys, this is Neil with Bology. Welcome to our video guide on Windows Server 2003 End of Support, which frankly has brought more hype than Revenge of the Sith. That said, there's a lot of information, so we wanted to break this into 3 separate parts. And besides, I'm pretty annoying and nobody wants to listen to me for more than 15 minutes. In this video, which is part 1, we're going to give you the basic details of the situation. What's happening, why not, and most importantly, what are the big security, compliance, and support implications that your business needs to be aware of. In part 2, we break down your options. You can isolate the problem, refresh your data center, move your apps to the cloud, enter into a customer service agreement, or you can stick your head in the sand like an ostrich and do absolutely nothing. In part 3, we cover migration best practices and teach you how to leverage your solution provider for best results. There are tangible things you can do to make this process less stressful and less expensive, so make sure you watch part 3 to get those tips. And this is really cool. We're going to give you the ability to skip around to the sections you care about the most, so keep an eye out for the navigation bar at the bottom of your screen. So stay tuned. Part 1 starts now. So the first piece is, let's start separating the hype from the facts. What exactly is happening?
Well, so what's occurring is July 14th, 2015, Windows Server 2003 is going end of support. So what does that mean? Are your servers going to stop working? No, absolutely not. Well, they may, but not because of the end of support, right? Ultimately, what it means is that Microsoft will no longer be providing publicly available support for the Server 2003 platform.
Tell me a little bit about the positive side, right? What is it that 2003 didn't have that may have been something that we kind of viewed as a nice to have, but now has really become a need to have? There's a lot of features now that you don't have in Server 2003 that you would get access to down the road, right? Once you finally got to 2012 or 2008, depending on the direction and the path you wanted to take, right? Can you tell us some of the differentiators that have kind of left 2003 behind anyway?
So, and that's actually an excellent point. There are a vast number of improvements and enhancements in the operating system that have been made in the 2K8 platform and on into 2012, right? You've got great features like the new features of Hyper-V 3. You've got storage spaces. You've got DHCP clustering and things of that nature, right? And so those are neat functionalities. But then you also have the management functionalities that have been baked into newer versions of the operating system that make management of an enterprise or a mid-market server infrastructure much more seamless and at the end of the day, easy to do and more productive than the 2003 platform.
So easier to work with and a great deal more value is going to be available in a new solution anyway. So it's not like there's not going to be an ROI. Essentially, we'd be stepping over dollars to pick up pennies to stay, with the 2003 infrastructure, right?
Well, there's a lot of calculations to be made there, right? So to throw out a blanket statement like you're going to save money, right? Yes and no. Possibly, maybe not. But at the end of the day, there are a vast number of variables to be used in the TCO calculation, right? So if we're talking about 2003, to the point that you were just making, advancements in technologies have made administration easier, and not only that, but you have more engineers and resources that are going to be well versed in these current platforms. The more and more esoteric your infrastructure becomes, the more costly it's going to become to maintain those aged technical competencies.
Here's another question for you. Why is Microsoft doing this? Is this just for them to find a way to generate more revenue? Or is there another reason why Microsoft is taking this, shutting down 2003 and starting to push this 2012 a little harder?
There's always going to be the argument that they just want to, sunset their legacy products in an effort to, get the customers to migrate and move on and purchase new products, so forth and so on. First of all, you have a lot of operating enhancements, new functionalities. You also have some enhanced security functionalities and increased capabilities from the operating system perspective. Native BitLocker capabilities is one thing that comes to mind. Storage spaces, the advancements in Hyper-V 3.
And that was a pretty cool one too. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's been a lot of robustness baked into newer versions of the operating system that Server 2003 just didn't have, the technology didn't exist, or whatever the case may be. At the end of the day, there are going to be a lot of reasons to migrate to newer operating systems. Case in point, Server 2003 was largely in part a 32-bit operating system. Well, 32-bit operating systems are only capable of addressing 4 gigabytes of memory, right? So as you move on and increase the robustness of your applications, ultimately, they're going to run out of performance capabilities in a 32-bit operating environment. So again, yes, you can always make the argument that Microsoft just wants to sell more licensing, but at the end of the day, there's a lot more compelling reasons to be moving to newer versions of the OS.
What do you own from 2003 now? Right?
My kid's still around.
Right, that's it.
Other than that, I think that's
it.
about it.
Look at the life cycle of your smartphone, which nowadays is about the price of a server license, by the way, right? Look at the car that you drive. Well, your car is a 78 Pinto, so that one's a little old.
The 79.
I love that car, by the way. But there's really not a lot in our lives that's around since 2003.
Not electronic, not technologically speaking.
No,
the
especially
advancements
in the technology world,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's an important point. At some point, we've got to kind of get off of this thing and start to take a look at some of the enhancements.
You know, if nothing else, Neil, you have to look at today's discussion, right? Support. So ultimately, if you're going to stay on a legacy OS that's going to be a 32-bit operating environment, then you have to make sure that the hardware that you're leveraging is compatible, right? And at the end of the day, current gen hardware, you're going to start running into compatibility issues with legacy operating systems, just because there is so much difference in their functionality that newer hardware just was not designed to run legacy OSs like that.
We're going to run right into another one we hear a lot about, especially from Microsoft. If you've read any of their collateral on the matter, compliance is a major concern. Could you briefly run through some of the impact on this, and let's kind of remind everybody, we're not attorneys, right? So honestly, sometimes the worst advice is the free advice. So all this means is do some due diligence, double check all of this, and if your company's impacted by it, then you might want to check it out, right? So run us through this. So the major hitters, right, as far as compliance goes in the IT world.
You've got several different industry standard compliances, right? So your PCI DSS, your HIPAA compliance, Alta, High-Tech, SOX, FIPS. And then you also have your company compliances, right? Things that the company dictates that you do and or maintain just from a company policy perspective. Does running on Server 2003 necessarily mean that you are no longer in compliance just because you're on that OS and its end of support? Not necessarily. Again, you need to be diligent about checking what compliance regulations you're responsible for maintaining, right? But at the end of the day, there are a lot of implications that could potentially put you at risk. For example, there's nothing that I've found in HIPAA that necessarily states if you are on an unsupported version of Microsoft Server product that you are no longer in compliance. However, HIPAA does specifically state that an organization is responsible for guarding against detecting and reporting malicious software. Right?
So this means that it could be up for interpretation, right, to some degree. And I think that's the point, right, for all of them.
Correct. If your company is faced with some kind of data breach or data loss, and ultimately it's determined because that data breach occurred because you were on a Server 2003 platform that was exploited, you better have a rock-solid reason for still being on that platform and still having that platform in your environment. Otherwise, you may not have a legal leg to stand on. Right.
And we probably could shake a tree, 20 attorneys will fall out with different opinions on the matter. There's only one thing that matters, and that's if we get caught and we get fined. That's the only true validation. I don't think that's a price anybody wants to pay.
Sure.
So I would suggest the best piece of advice that any systems administrator or CIO or director that's faced with the decisions they have to make is do consider the risks that are associated with that, because even if you do pay a lot of attorneys, it's still never a guarantee, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's probably one of the more important pieces, but there's also another one that's really important. It's that for which compliance is really all about, is the security aspect of it.
You know, a lot of the security, especially in a data center, is not necessarily handled by Microsoft, right? So to be very realistic, yes, we do our security patches and our hot fixes and things of that nature. We also work very diligently to mitigate our risks through things like perimeter security and port monitoring and things of that nature. And then we can implement physical mitigations like locks on doors and screen protectors and two-factor authentication and whatnot. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we've completely mitigated all of our risks. And so there are a couple of different options there if you do have to maintain Server 2003 in your environment. However, that doesn't mean that you are going to be completely risk-free if you still have those OSs running in your environment. You can isolate them, which helps to mitigate the security risk. You still have the service and support challenge. But again, all it takes is one exploit, and as they say, physical access is unabated access.
Interesting fact, though, back in 2013, Microsoft Windows Server 2003 had 37 critical updates. So,
and that's not including system updates or?
No, that's just, critical updates. You're right. The point is that there's constantly something that needs to be patched. Most of the time, it's security related. Sometimes it's stability issues, right? What does that translate to, for a customer? I mean, what's the impact?
If your systems are not able to receive updates, then, ultimately you're going to be at risk because you're not receiving the patches that are going to close out the exploits and vulnerabilities that are discovered. And the bottom line is that there are going to continue to be vulnerabilities discovered, not only in 2003, but moving on into other operating systems. And there's a lot of shared code set there. So it doesn't, your exploits and your attacks won't necessarily have to be targeted at 2003. If that exploit exists in 2003, then you're at risk.
Okay, fair enough. So it's definitely something we want to keep in mind when we're trying to figure out whether the risk is something that we need to be concerned about.
Absolutely. As we're going through and doing our risk versus cost calculations, it's definitely something that we need to take into an account. And unfortunately, those are unknown or at this point kind of unquantifiable risks. So it's very, very difficult to attach a hard dollar amount to those risks.
It's called end of support. So, duh,
Yep.
It means you get no more, right?
It means you're either on your own or you have to maintain not only a premium support agreement, but also a custom support agreement with Microsoft.
Oh, wait a minute. So you're saying there's support?
There is pay for support. It's very simple. Support is no longer publicly available. You will have to enter into a premium support agreement with Microsoft and also maintain a custom support agreement on an annual basis for your 2003 servers.
But wait a minute, Kevin. My 16-bit DOS-based application requires 2003. What am I going to do?
Upgrade your application.
There is a point in time where you might have to get a divorce and find another application. Because if your application provider is not willing to support an operating system that is actually still supported,
Right.
You're probably asking for trouble.
In most cases, it's going to be the exact opposite. Eventually, the vendor is going to stop supporting the legacy versions that run on the legacy operating systems. Why? Because again, it's esoteric skill sets, and the more a skill set becomes deprecated, the more expensive it is to maintain. So are they going to have their developers and their coders constantly developing and updating old code? No, they've moved on.
Yeah. So you mentioned costs, right? Let's touch on that one.
Sure.
So what is the implication if I hang out? Is there and stay on 2003, right? You just noted one, right? That could be an implication of cost. Are there some other sort of examples on why sticking with 2003 could be costly?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got the potential risks for your security and your support concerns, right? But then you also have to consider what the total cost of ownership of maintaining a legacy environment is going to be. So support alone with Microsoft, again, you're going to have to enter into a premium support agreement as well as a custom support agreement. You have to pay individually for each hotfix and or system patch that you need. Oh, and here's the kicker. You cannot enter into a premium support agreement unless you already have a migration plan in place to move off of 2003.
There's some rumors that a custom support agreement in the first year alone could approach at least or close to 200K. Is that something you've heard?
I've heard nasty numbers. My guess would be that it is at least in the six-figure range.
Yeah,
and that's on an annual basis.
Okay, so if you're paying for one of those, then your alternative must have been way more expensive than that.
Absolutely.
Coming up next, we're talking about your options, you slacker. You're looking at a data center upgrade, a custom service agreement, or moving your apps into the cloud. Which one makes the most sense for your business? Watch part 2 to find that out.